Hi, my name is Terry Doherty, creator of the Glory and Empire system by Old Guard Publishing. Pre-orders for Unclaimed Victory, Fuentes de Onoro are now open at oldguardpublishing.com. In this video, I'm going to discuss the Brigade Game command rules. So the Brigade Game command rules are not like any other battalion level game out there, and you'll see that when you get into the rules. So for the most part, the concepts in the game are straight out of the regulations of the period, including the concepts of a directing unit. In the infantry regulations, they would call that a directing battalion. In the cavalry regulations, it would be a directing regiment or a directing squadron. But the concepts are the same, regardless of infantry or cavalry regulations. And all I've done mostly is just adapt them for hex and counter games. So it's pretty straightforward. It seems complex, but for the most part, it's a matter of geometry and some military tradition to simplify command and control, and just the practical method of actually trying to control long lines of units that are nearly a kilometer long, which no one alive today really has any experience of doing that for units in close order formation. So let's dive into the details of the Brigade Game command rules. So as you know, the Glory and Empire system has 3 levels of rules. There's the Soldier's Game, which is an introductory set, then the Battalion Game, which is the mid-level set, and has everything you need to do to have a full-scale simulation of a battalion game. And then the Brigade Game, which adds the command rules and a lot of other details for formations and artillery. So in the Soldiers and Battalion Game, you're familiar with the command range method. So every leader has a command range, which is in the circle on the counter. So in this case, Montfort's command range is 3. So any unit that's within 3 hexes of him is in command. However, in the Brigade Game, we're going to change that for brigade leaders. For corps leaders, division leaders, and the overall commander, they still use the command range method. So let's see. So Montfort's division leader is Ferret. He would still use the command range method. So if any of his brigade leaders remain within 4 of Ferret, they will be in command. And Loisson is Ferret's corps leader, and he has a command range of 5, so any division leader in Loisson's corps that stays within 5 of Loisson is also in command. So that part does not change in the Brigade Game. What does change is how we handle command and control for the brigade leaders. And a brigade leader is defined as a leader that has subordinate units but no subordinate leaders. So if we look at the command display here for some of the British units, we have Ashworth's Brigade, which has just these units assigned to him, no subordinate leaders. We have Sanchez's Brigade, which also has subordinate units and no leaders, so they count as brigade leaders, regardless of their rank and regardless of whether it's called a brigade or if it's called something else. Here we have the Cavalry Reserve, which is Lieutenant General Cotton, is a division leader. He's got 3 brigade leaders, and they all have subordinate units but no subordinate leaders, so they're brigade leaders. Cotton himself has subordinate leaders, so he is not a brigade leader as defined by the rules. And it should be pretty clear on the command display which ones, and you can kind of think of these as the leaves of the tree, and the divisions and corps leaders and overall commander as the branches and the trunk of the tree. So one important thing, so the brigade leaders have 2 methods of placing units in command. They can use the Grand Tactical Formation system, which is the primary method in the Brigade Game, and they can also use the tactical method. And the tactical method is a command range method, just like in the Soldiers and Battalion Game, except that the brigade leader's command range is reduced to 0, regardless of what it says on the counter or on the command display. So that means they can really only command the units they're directly stacked with if they use the tactical method. And players can choose that method from turn to turn as they need to. So the Grand Tactical method, there are basically 2 types of Grand Tactical formations: the Grand Column and the Line of Battle. And I'll get a little bit into that in more detail as we go through the rules. So the primary concept of the Grand Tactical Formation is the directing unit. So basically the brigade leader goes and stacks with the combat unit of the Grand Tactical Formation, and we call that the directing unit. So in the regulations of the period, that would be called the directing battalion for infantry, or directing squadron, or directing regiment for cavalry. And basically what's happening is that the brigade leader is bossing the battalion commander around and telling him what to do. And the colors of that battalion literally march out a little bit in front of the rest of the units in the line of battle, so that all down the line, all the other leaders in the front part of their battalions can see the colors of the directing unit. So if the colors of the directing unit begin to march forward, then they'll all take that as the cue that they should begin marching forward. And that's why you'll see line of sight is very important for deciding who's in command with lines of battle. So in the game, you can change the directing unit. The leader can move to a different unit and change the directing unit, and that'll help you keep units in command, particularly in tight spaces. So like in the woods, you could form a line of battle 3 hexes wide if you put the directing unit in the middle, because the units on the flanks can see that unit. Or there may be particular evolutions to go from line of battle to grand column, or grand column to line of battle, or to wheel, or some other kind of evolution that requires the directing unit to be a particular unit on the flank of the wheel. So then the leader moves to that unit and marks that as the directing unit. Okay, assets, just like any other thing, if they're part of the brigade leader, then they have to conform to the requirements of a grand tactical formation to be in command. And formation units in the grand tactical formation can be in any particular formation. There are some restrictions on which types of units can be the grand tactical the directing unit for that grand tactical formation. So you could have the order mixed, which would have some units in line and some units in column in a line of battle. There's some rules on stacking, so rules on rejoining a grand tactical formation or reforming a grand tactical formation. So once you get into combat, then the grand tactical formations will get all jumbled up from some units advancing, some units getting repulsed and having to retreat, or some units breaking. And they may have to move to regain their in-command status. And that's what rejoining the grand tactical formation covers. And then reforming the grand tactical formation. Sometimes the entire brigade will be broken, and the leader will have to move someplace and try and rally his units. And then the units move to reform the grand tactical formation, and he can choose whatever type of grand tactical formation he wants that to be. There's a nice diagram showing some of the markers. So some of them have to do with tactical formations, like these top 4, and then other ones have to do with the grand tactical formation system, such as line of battle, grand column, and then there's 2 flavors, double line of battle or double grand column. And then the left in front and right in front, I'll get into that later. That's that's an optional rule because it adds a little bit of complexity to the grand tactical formation rules, but it's actually very important and an important part of how they did things back in the horse and musket period. But it does add complexity to the game, and I recommend that people don't adopt that until they are a little more familiar with the grand tactical formations. Some other things involving, and these are also to do with ordering the units. Line of battle inverted, line of battle out of order, or subunits inverted. And evolution in progress if they're unable to complete an evolution in one turn. Then some other markers for various things. Okay, so back to grand tactical formations. We've got two basic types, grand column and line of battle, which again there's the double line of battle and double grand column. So for a grand column, which is a multi-battalion column, so if we put the pieces on the map, then let's say we got our units like this, and one thing about SED units is we allow them to be within 2 hexes of the any unit of the grand tactical formation that's in command, and they're also in command, so they can provide some flank protection or some advanced guard protection. So for a grand column, he stacks with the front of the unit of the grand column. And if you formed let's see, so here's the marker. So I typically just place the marker next to the leader because it's fairly obvious who it belongs to. Okay, so if we want to do double grand column, then we would say have 2 columns like this, and then the DU could be with either of the columns. Let's see if I can find a double grand column marker. And the double grand column, you can see it's got a -2 penalty for evolution checks, which that's what that number is for in the gray box. So for the double grand column, the leader of the second column that's not the DU has to have a line of sight to the DU in order to be in command. So you got to be cognizant of that and maneuver your units accordingly. And if there's some terrain you have to pass to maintain that line of sight, you may want to force march through it to get to the other side of it as quickly as possible in order to maintain your command for the next turn. So there are some restrictions on following the grand column. So we'll go back to single grand column. So as the grand column moves, the other units will just follow. So if he goes here and turns, then goes that way, then these guys go and turn in the same hex, and everybody kind of follows. There are some evolutions that allow you to take some sort of shortcuts for that, and I'll get into that when we get to the evolutions. But for the most part, the units trailing the directing unit have to follow directly behind it and turn in the same hexes that he turns in. Okay, I've already covered the infantry companies and SEDs, so anywhere within 2, they're in command, they're just fine. And we covered direct or double grand column. Okay, so grand column stacking. So you can have any stacking anywhere between, and this gets into the kind of tactical details of the types of columns that are part of the grand column. And it has to do with the distance between the battalions, and it also has to do with the distance between the sub-elements of the battalion itself. So if each battalion was in column of companies, then the distance between the companies in the column could be either closed, which is a close column, or it could be quarter distance or half distance, or it could be full distance. And so close column is the most compact way and efficient way to move around the battlefield. And by the time we get to like 1813, that's probably the most prevalent method for maneuvering around the battlefield. Especially with the very dense battlefields of Central Europe at Leipzig and Bautzen and Dresden. So there are some advantages and disadvantages to these types of column. I don't think I'll really get into that right now, because that's a whole kind of other subject that's kind of separate from the brigade level command rules. But there are some implications. So if you're in close column, you could stack up to the maximum stacking distance of the entire hex. So in open, that's 20 strength points. So if these guys were all in close column, you could have a close grand column with all of them in one hex like that. If they were in, say, fully open column, then they have to have no more than 7 SP per hex to be in open column. So we could say that guy has 5, this guy has 7, this guy has 2, or we could do it like this and still say they meet the requirements to be in open column. And there's markers for those for the different types of column. So here we have open column and close column on the back side of the marker. So that's it with stacking, and again, that's more of a tactical consideration, but in very compact battlefields like Borodino, you may have quite a few brigades in close column all jammed up together. Okay, now let's get on to line of battle. Okay, so grand column is basically the maneuvering formation on the battlefield, and then line of battle, of course, is the fighting formation as it sounds. So line of battle, you can be in any kind of a line of battle that has to be in a straight line within the limitations of the hex grid. So since the hex grid is not, every possible angle, so for example, say we wanted to have a line of units like that, we could do that with a line of battle, and that would still be considered straight. And these guys, again, can be in a mixture of column or line. So if we have the 2 middle guys in column and the 2 end guys in line, that would be perfectly valid. And again, skirmish companies can be within 2 of any of the units and be in command. And the directing unit can be any one of these. There are evolutions that require the directing unit to be a particular one, so if you're going to do a wheel of a line of battle, then the directing unit has to be on the on the flank that you're going to wheel from. So facing is important for the line of battle. So the directing unit sets the facing for the line of battle. So if this guy is in line here and he's the directing unit, then these two hexes define the facing. So then everybody else in the line of battle has the same facing if they face one of these hex sides in their formation. So the units in column are in command as long as they're facing those two. If he faced that way, he would be out of command. And so same thing for that guy. That counts. So they share the vertex with the hex sides of the directing unit. And likewise, if this guy was in line like that, he would be out of command because he's not facing the right way. He has to share that vertex with the directing unit. So if the directing unit was in column, then that obviously opens up a little more possibilities because the column has a wider facing than line. So obviously those two guys are in command. This guy's in command, and he could face that way and be technically in command to kind of give it a little bit of a refused flank there. And then also for line of battle, we have the double line of battle. Where's my marker? There it is. So if we had something like this, you could be in double line of battle. And so typically when you're playing, if you want to form your units in double lines of battle, you're probably going to want to put your directing unit with the rear line so that if these guys are attacked and break, then you still have guys in your second line that are still in command. Because if your directing unit is up there and he breaks, then he's gone off to the rear somewhere and everybody's out of command. So typically you put your commander with the reserves. And likewise, if you're on the attack and you send these two guys in to attack, you can keep the remaining guys in command to either rally the troops if they break, or provide a line for them to rally behind, or to provide a way to send in some units to help assist. Okay, and then I guess the last thing is a line of sight. So a clear line of sight to the directing unit, which again has implications for the slopes in line of sight. So these are military crests. So if we had, say, a guy here and a guy here, then this military crest is going to block the line of sight to that guy, so he would be out of command. So you have to be very aware of that as you're maneuvering your lines of battle, and keep your lines of sight. It's one of the reasons they didn't like to fight in the woods and the villages, because they basically lose a lot of command and control when they do that. Okay, so now let's get on to how the Grand Tactical Formations move. So the Grand Tactical Formation moves as if it's a large rigid entity. So its moves are segmented into each piece of the move. So let's kind of go through an example here, and then I'll go back over the rules a little bit. So the first thing we do is move the directing unit. So let's say we wanted to move these guys forward 2 hexes, then wheel. Let's say 1 hex. Maybe I'll back this up a little bit and give myself a little more room, since I didn't leave room for the village there, which is an important consideration in the game, is making sure you have enough room to do your maneuvers. And was very important to our historical counterparts as well, in order to make sure that they have enough room to deploy and they have enough room to make the maneuvers that they need to. And that's some of the reasons you see for the inexplicable delays that happen when, say, marching out of the bridgehead from Marengo, where the Austrians are so clustered together that they have difficulty deploying. Okay, so if we move forward 2 hexes, we move the directing unit first. Then this is the first segment of the move. Then everybody else moves their 2 hexes forward. And we're just going to ignore the contours for now and just assume that it's 1 MP per hex. So that's 2 movement points expended for the GTF at that point. Now we're going to wheel. So this is a fairly long GTF with 4 units. And we're going to wheel this way. So to do that, again, the directing unit moves first. So he changes facing. That's an evolution. Whenever the whenever the DU changes facing, that triggers a change of front evolution, which there's several flavors of that, and this is one of the simple ones. Well, I should say less complex ones. It's a wheel, which we look at our fancy card here, is the change of front by wheeling, which forward is an ordinary evolution, backward is a difficult evolution, which was some units practice that more than others, and we're better at it. Okay, so that triggers an evolution. For an evolution, we spend 1 movement point. That's basically, so in the case of a wheel, what the general of brigade is literally doing is sending his brigade major or aide-de-camp to the other end of where he wants the line to wheel to. So since we're on a hex grid, it's going to be a 60-degree wheel by definition. So he sends his brigade major out there, and then he's literally waving his sword around back and forth to tell him to move left or right to get on the line that he wants. So that's what the 1 MP cost is accounting for in this particular case. And then once he's satisfied with where the brigade major is, then the wheel begins and the order goes out. And the directing unit begins wheeling. And then everybody else sees that the directing unit begins wheeling and wheels. So that's 1 MP, so we spent 2 MP going from here to here, plus 1 MP for the evolution. And in the brigade game, it's 1 MP for a unit in line to change facing, so that's 4 MP spent so far. For the whole brigade, regardless of what they've done wheeling so far. And they, of course, spend their 1 MP and then march forward, so that's 5 for them. And then, yeah, 5 for them, 6 for him, and then 7 movement points for him. So normally that's the maximum movement allowance for most infantry units, so they would be done with their movement that turn. And then at the completion of their movement there, they would take a evolution check. And then also, since we've now spent more than 4 MP in line per the battalion rules, the disorder checks for each MP expended over 4 in line, we take a disorder check with -5. So if we fail the evolution check, everybody takes a disorder check. And if we fail, then everybody that spent over 4 is going to expend or take a disorder check for the MP they expended over 4. So that would be this guy, this guy, this guy. He spent 5, he spent 6, he spent 7. And this guy, even though he didn't spend 7 MP, he has to mark time. And all these guys have to mark time waiting for this guy to get into his place in the line of battle before they can continue forward. So let's say we were Superman and we had 9 movement points, or we want to just force march, then we could do another segment and march forward however many movement points we had left remaining to do that, and then take the evolution check. But you can see how it's segmented, where we went from here to here, wheeled, then the whole went to there, as if it was one giant formation. And then we treat their movement as complete when that's done, and do the necessary disorder checks and evolutions. Although the evolution takes place immediately after we finish the wheel, the evolution check. And you can do multiple evolutions in one turn if you've got the movement points. But it's generally a lot of movement points. Okay, so let's back up the wheel here. Yeah, I guess I'll get into that in a little bit. Okay, so that's movement. Let's see what else is in here. Yeah, so we said units of the Grand Tactical Formation track their MP independently, but they mark time when other units have to do things. So if there's particular obstacles, you can go around them. So let's just say there's a building here. So generally, the units in the Grand Tactical Formation have to maintain their position relative to the GTF, or relative to the directing unit. But if there's an obstacle, then units can go around it. So if the DU went to there, this guy could go here to go around the obstacle. and this guy could go around the obstacle this way, and this guy would just go straight forward there. And that's perfectly acceptable to be out of position during the movement, but at the end of your movement you want to be back in position so that they can be in command during the next turn. There is an exception to that I'll get to when we look more at evolutions. Okay, so there's kind of the move that I was showing with the evolution and doing the segmented moves and the MP expended. And during evolutions, there could be a lot of units that are spending time just marking time, waiting for other units to get to their position in place. Okay, kind of the last thing I want to cover for movement of the GTF until we get into evolutions is leaving the GTF. And this is partly to prevent people from gaming the rules so that they don't say, oh, my guys are leaving the GTF, and they do some hokey thing that doesn't comply with the regular evolutions. And partly to deal with assaults and charges. So remember what I said about having the leader kind of remain in place while the other guys go in charge, or go in an assault or charge. So basically, when you're going in for an assault, what you want to do is, so if I want to just say send these guys into an assault and leave these guys behind, or maybe send every other one, then I want to declare these guys as leaving the GTF. So I declare they leave the GTF, and I do that before I move the DU. That's required. And let's say I decide to send them in for I declare their assaults right away so that they can get the maximum benefit from being further away from the enemy. And these guys are in line, so for the French that would be an assault method violation. So they would go forward and do their assault. And now you can see that they would not be in command. They're no longer in a straight line, so they wouldn't be considered in command for the next turn. But that's okay because we've already decided that they've left the GTF. Then if you move these guys in such a way that you then say I said they left the GTF and moved to there. Not really. This is not really a great example. But then these guys move forward and basically reform the GTF. Then that would be a violation, and everybody would be automatically worsen their morale state by one level. And that's mostly like I say, a punishment to prevent people from trying to game the rules by moving their units in such a way that they'd be in command next turn without doing the proper evolutions. Okay, so back to assaults. So if we have our units here, if it's possible, you can try and send in the entire brigade. So let's say we want to send in this entire brigade, and we'll just put assault markers there to kind of show that they're all going into assault. Now, in order for these guys to remain in command, this guy is going to march forward to here, and this guy would march forward to here, this guy would march forward to here. This guy can march forward to there. He can't go to there because that would place him out of command, and he has to maintain his relative position to the DU in order to be part of the GTF. So you could, for example, declare this guy as leaving the GTF and send him into assault there, assuming the village is occupied by enemy forces, which it will be in the Fuentes de Onoro scenario. That's one possibility. But if you want to keep them all in command, you could leave that guy here, and he would not be able to assault because there's nobody in front of him to assault. And we already showed the case where you pick some and leave the GTF. The other alternative is if they're, say, in double line of battle. Then there's no limit on the distance between the two lines of battle other than maintaining line of sight. So this guy could be, they could be 20 hexes away if they could maintain line of sight to that. But of course the downside of that is it's pretty easy to disrupt line of sight by sending a cavalry unit in there, and suddenly your guys would be out of command. So generally, even if it's a double line of battle, I don't micromanage the distance between the double lines of battle. I let players decide, and then it's up to the enemy player to punish them if they do something stupid by extending themselves too much. Because there's no hard and fast rules in reality about that. There's just general conventions, and some situations it's appropriate, other situations it's not. And that's up to the commander on the spot. So anyway, so back to double line of battle. So we could say send in the first line of units and have them assault. And they would still technically be in command because they have a line of sight to the DU still. Now that may not be true after combat occurs. They might be out of command because they might be out of position relative to the DU. But you could send in the first line that way and still keep everybody in command, and these guys as your reserve, as a rallying point, or as a means to send in reinforcements if necessary to reinforce success or reinforce defeat if you're into that method of command. Okay, so now I'll start going through some of the evolutions. Okay, so the Brigade game, there's a number of evolutions which are not all covered in the rules. And that's because some of them are basically what follows under the rubric of restructuring the grand tactical formation, and that could be things like opening and closing the line of battle of the grand tactical formation. So if you have the guys in line of battle, and we want to spread out, then we could open the line of battle, do an opening the line of battle evolution. And so this guy could either change facing and march over, or he could march by the flank and likewise to open up the line of battle. And again, there's the only requirement is to maintain facing and line of sight between the DU and the constituent units. So I don't micromanage that, but of course there's practical limitations in terms of how the enemy player can mess with you if you extend too far. But this does allow you to cover a larger area, say on a flank or something like that, where you may not need to be able to cover every hex, but you want to be able to at least prevent the enemy from just marching through there, or give them some pause to doing that. So that falls under that. There's also, if you want to form double line of battle, then you could march out this way to have those guys go there, or you could march out every other unit to form line of battle. Oops, let's see. We'll do like this to form double line of battle. Various whatever possible ways there are to go to do that as far as maneuvering of units, and you may want to do that differently depending on whether you have an organization by regiments or whether you have an organization just by battalions, depending on the army in question. And then the other types of, and the same thing applies to the grand column or line of battle, either making double grand column or single grand column, or opening and closing the distance between the units of the grand column, or changing their relative position to the DU. So if you want to shuffle your units around, definitely usually not something a commander would want to do on the battlefield, but I think players will struggle a little bit trying to get their units in the right place when they first start playing in order to make sure they have enough space and make sure they have room for units to deploy. And typically you're going to send in entire brigades, and then when that brigade gets messed up, you're going to want to pull the entire brigade out and substitute another brigade in there and not try and intermix the two. Okay, the second type of evolution is going from grand column to line of battle. And there's various, and going from grand column to line of battle. Typically in the games, you'll be going from grand column to line of battle as units march onto the battlefield, deploy, and get ready for combat. There will maybe be cases where if the enemy forces are separated enough where you have vanquished them and send them in retreat, where you want to form grand column again and go forward, or cases where you approach a defile where you want to form a grand column to get through the defile, through a trail through a woods, or a trail through a village or something like that, where you want to get through it as quickly as possible and then deploy on the other side. And that has lots of implications if the enemy's right on the other side in terms of how you do that. So that can require careful maneuvering by the player. Okay, so let's quickly go through the deployment methods. So the simplest one is the processional. And this is the old school processional method that's been used since basically linear formations were created. And basically, they're in, let's see, I gotta get my guys in the right order here. So let's say we're marching down the road here in grand column. Make sure I got this on the camera so you can see it. I'll just ignore that skirmisher for now, get him out of the way. So we're in grand column, marching forward, and we want to deploy. So let's say we want to deploy on a line here so we can be ready to assault the village. So we could march forward in grand column, 1, 2, 3, and then turn, which costs nothing for a column in the Brigade game, unless it's a special type of column, close column or attack column. Okay, so that's 3, 4, 5, 6, and they follow along. So we march parallel to where we want to form line of battle, and then we do the processional deployment method and form line of battle. And again, they can typically in like Frederick the Great's day, they would be an open column and they would quarter wheel into line, and then wait for the signal cannon and go into to combat. So in Frederick's day, he would, in his early days, up till about 1758, when the Austrians started to do more complicated things and the armies started to get a little bit larger, he would maneuver his entire army as one giant grand tactical formation. They would, at a signal cannon, they would turn either to the left or the right as he wanted to go. Then at another signal cannon, the whole would stop. And then at another signal cannon, they would all turn left or face left or face right into line of battle as necessary, depending on which way they were going. And then at another signal cannon, the whole thing would march forward. So, but that was his extremely well drilled army, and no other army at that time could pull that off. So the Austrians started coming up with ways to do that, and Frederick the Great himself, as the armies got larger, was always looking for faster and faster ways to deploy onto the line of battle. And at some point, the armies got so large that they could no longer march in 2 or 3 long columns, because by the time the last ones got onto the battlefield, the battle would be over. So they started looking at ways to deploy from multiple directions simultaneously in order to have everybody enter the battle as quickly as possible. And that's what these other ones are. So the Tura, which literally means by drawers, where they march out perpendicular to where they're going to form in the line of battle and then march forward into their place in line of battle. And then there's a direct route, also called the hypotenuse, where they just follow the hypotenuse. And again, you can see this is where it's just a matter of geometry, where you've got a parallelogram or a square, which would in reality be, but we're kind of limited by our hex grid here, where they're basically just figuring out the easiest and quickest ways to traverse that square into the line of battle. And the direct route, of course, is the quickest way along the hypotenuse to march in there. And there are certain restrictions on what type of units the units could be in, or what type of formation the units could be in order to deploy in those various methods. And so Frederick the Great invented all these methods during his course, either during the 7 Years' War or shortly afterwards. And he considered a lot of this stuff state secrets, and every copy of his regulations was numbered and checked out, and it was the responsibility of the officer to return it when his service period was up. Then the last one is display the close column, where the units in the ground column are in close column, and they basically march by the flank to their position in lines of battle. And you can see this happening a lot in 1813, when the density of the battlefields got higher and the troops were more untrained and unable to do these more complicated maneuvers without falling into disorder. And you can see that sometimes that happening at Ligny, where Tippelkirk's brigade tried to do a change of front to the rear, pivoting in place, and they totally flubbed it. Okay, so let's go through these other ones. So again, let's say we're back in here and grand column. So we want to do the Achura method. This guy would march out to here and forward down. This guy would march out to here and down, and this guy would march out to here and down. And you can see it's going to take quite a few movement points to do the outer limit if the grand column is fairly long or the line of battle is fairly long. And this is the case where maybe you want to close up your column a little bit and have them be a little bit closer so their distances are less to go on that hypotenuse. So they could be in a denser column and either stack like that and then either complete their evolution and choose to open the LOB at that point. Or you could say they could be in double LOB at that point with the top units in the front and the bottom units in the back of the LOB. And then you could have them march forward to form double LOB like that. Or they could just march out to their places from there. So he could march to there, and these guys would march out to there and out to there. So a little bit less movement point cost, but still some. And for those evolutions. And again, at the end of the evolution, we take the evolution check. And if the evolution check fails, which is this little chart here, so take the evolution check, there's modifiers for type of evolution, whether you're forming LOB on the non-lead unit or on forming ground column on the non-right unit. Each evolution check after the first in the same turn, and a little bit more if it's twilight or night. Plus markers on the DRM, so double LOB would be -2, and double ground column would be -2 if you're already in those there's double formations. So then if we roll less than or 2, it's a fail. And then the type of evolution has a modifier as well, which is the color coding on the chart. Okay, then the last method is the direct route, which we'll deploy this way this time, since that I think illustrates it a little better. So they would just march straight directly on, and you can see that's a little bit faster to go that way. And then display the close column. If they were all in grand close column, which this brigade has only 9 and 5, 14 strength points. They could easily be all in one hex. Then they would just march out to their locations in the line of battle to form line of battle like that. And again, they can be in any formation. They could be in line or column or square even. Or the only thing is the directing unit cannot be a SED unit. So the SED basically, the SED units are very difficult to control because it's a bunch of men. And if you can imagine during a noisy battle, they're typically not going to know anything about that's happening on the battlefield other than what's directly in front of them that they can see. And trying to control that with bugle calls is very difficult. So it's not a good way to maintain control if you're the brigade leader. So no SED as the directing unit. Okay, so one last thing about these types of evolutions. So we have an evolution in progress marker. So if for some reason you have a large grand column, or you've already spent some movement points, so you say you've already marched forward 4 MP and you want to deploy using a direct route method, so that's going to cost you 1, so that's 5 total, so that's 6, 7, he's done for normal movement, assuming you don't force march. And sometimes it's really worth force marching, but likely you'll end up with some guys disordered and you'll have to spend some time reordering your guys before you go in the attack, or take a risk and deploy your guys and go into the attack with some in disorder. And those are the kind of decisions you'll have to make depending on what the other player does, as far as if you're on the defensive or on the attack, and whether the other side is prepared. And in the process of bringing up reserves, you might want to just go forward as quickly as possible. So if this guy moves forward his 2, this guy moves forward his 2, then that would be 7 MP. So we put in a evolution in progress marker on there, and then we'd indicate the type of grand tactical formation we're going to. So in this case, we're going from ground column to line of battle. So these guys would complete their movement. These guys are are still going to be in command because they're in the middle of completing their evolution. So then the next turn, at the earliest opportunity, you're going to complete the evolution before you can do anything else. And so once you start an evolution, you have to complete it. You can't stop the evolution in the middle and try and start a new evolution. You have to complete whichever evolution you're in the process of completing. So be a little careful of that when close to the enemy, and take the appropriate precautions. Okay, so now let's cover changes of front for lines of battle. So again, for Grand Column, they can change front just by following the DU, which is the front unit. And then one final method for Grand Column is, so I guess I should say, when you do the evolutions to go from Grand Column to line of battle, the Grand Column has to be in a straight line. Otherwise, things just get a little awkward for the guys on the ground. So let's say we wanted to change our Grand Column by one hex side, but not have everybody, follow and pivot. We just wanted to change in place. So we can do that, and this is called the prompt maneuver, which I'm not sure who comes up with these names, but somebody doing a little bit of marketing for their new evolution that they thought of. And the guys just kind of march by the flank to get into place behind the DU, and they just march. Literally are going to march over, doing whatever facing changes or marching by the flank is necessary to do that, and that's called the prompt maneuver. Those are the two ways you can change facing in Grand Column. Okay, so in line of battle, it's quite different. So we've already kind of shown a wheeling maneuver. So if we wanted to wheel this way, then we spend 1 MP for the evolution, the DU changes face, and then everybody else moves forward and changes facing. I guess, so that's wheeling. I guess, let's back up a little bit. So there's three methods. So change the front by marching out, change the front by wheeling, change the front by pivoting in place. And this is the most complex, as you can imagine. Okay, so marching out, the DU is going to change facing. The other guys are going to literally march forward and change facing into their hex, wherever they are. And that's change of front by marching out. Now if they're wheeling, then they're basically going to do just like a single battalion line is going to wheel. They're going to wheel, and he's going to wheel and march forward, and he's going to wheel and march forward. And in reality, they're going to kind of complete their wheel as they march along the arc that's created from here to here. But with our individual counters, we can't really show that in detail. But it's mainly a difference of where they do their wheel at, either all along the line or at the very end of their maneuver. And you might do that more if the units were in column, where they would march out, and then the column would change facing in the final hex along the line where the brigade leader wants to form line of battle. And then the last one is change of front by pivoting in place. And obviously if we do it on the right or the left unit, then that's just a wheel. So, but if we wanted to do it on the middle unit, say we wanted to do the DU was going to change facing like that, then this guy would have to march backwards and change facing. This guy would have to change facing and move forward, change facing and move forward into their line of battle, conforming with the directing unit. And this is where Tippelkirk's brigade at Ligny got into trouble, where he had the Prussians were forming their brigades, which were really divisions in 3 lines of battle, and they were pivoting in place and got all jumbled up in the heat of the moment, which caused them some problems. And then at the end of that, you take an evolution check. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it for the various changes of front. So one last thing I think I want to go over for the Brigade Game command rules is doing things on the units that are not in the lead. So, for example, if we wanted to go from Grand Column to line of battle on the rear unit of the GTF. So let's say we got, we're in Grand Column here. And we decided the enemy is a little closer than I want, so I want to deploy to the rear and not on the lead unit. So we could move the DU to the rear unit, and then everybody's going to deploy on him to go into line of battle. So we're going to line of battle, so then if we do the direct route, then he's going to march backwards to there, or do the about face or whatever is necessary to get there. And then these guys are going to march back. And you can do that on any unit of the GTF. So if you wanted to say deploy on the middle unit, you could do that and go this way to deploy in line of battle. And in some cases that's going to be the fastest way to deploy a line of battle. You see the distance between the units is going to be reduced, but you can see the penalty for doing that is form LOB on the non-lead unit is -1 for your evolution check, or form ground column on the non-right unit if you're in LOB is a -1 on the evolution check. So there is a little bit of a penalty for that. And then there's also disorder check penalties if units march backward, or there might be additional MP costs if they have to turn around and march into their place in the line of battle. So that's just some of the possibilities of doing things on the non-lead unit of a grand column. Okay, so I think that's all I'm going to cover for the Brigade Game command rules in this video. I may do one on the order of battle sometime. That one, as I say, is optional because it adds quite a bit of complexity to what's already a lot to digest for people just coming to understand and realize how brigade level command and control actually worked on the battlefield. So I will cover that later, and hopefully people will start adopting that as they get into that. And that's a little bit more complex. We basically have a proper order for units in the line of battle, an inverted order for units in the line of battle, which are both acceptable. Any other order other than normal and inverted is not acceptable. And that's partly about confusion. You can imagine that in combat, fear is prevalent everywhere, and people are sometimes barely aware of what's happening because of that. And that includes leaders as well as men in the rank and file. So keeping everybody in their proper place and keeping everybody where they know they're supposed to be helps ease that confusion that occurs due to the fear created by being in battle. And that's why they maintain the ordering. And we'll get into that in a future video. Thanks. Hope you enjoyed the video.